Chad went from a complete beginner to making over $90,000 of bookings over the course of his first year. Now, he started off with long-term rentals, but quickly realized that short-term rentals could be way more lucrative. So we're gonna go over how he's been able to crush it with his property and plans for the future. You don't want to miss this episode as he shows us how to dominate a less competitive market. All right, we got Chad here. Thanks again for your time, Chad. Looking forward to speaking with you today. I know you've been, doing really well with property here, but before we get into all that, wanted to take a step back and kind of hear about your experience, your background, and we'll take it from there.
Sounds good, Preston. And first off, thank you for having me on here. I'm a huge fan, definitely a student of yours for sure. Hopefully a success story. But as far as my background, pretty normal guy. I've got a beautiful wife, 2 beautiful kids, dog. 2 dogs, actually. Got another dog. Been working at the same job for about 16 years. And my wife's a full-time teacher. And, basically, I think I felt a lot like a lot of people when COVID came through, just kind of in a rut, just, really looking inside myself and seeing, am I doing what I really want to do? And so, I started thinking about legacy, and I started thinking about, what am I going to leave for my kids? And, is this really what I want to do for the rest of my life? And wanted to make more money, obviously. And, that's when I started kind of looking out where else I could bring some more income in. And your information came out. I started seeing your material, your learning from you and others. And so I started to actually invest in myself, start taking some classes, start putting some money out there. And I purchased my first short-term rental, which is Camp Manatee. Purchased that October 25th, so about a year ago. And yeah, it's doing great. It's exceeded my expectations. I'm on track to hit probably just under 90,000 gross revenue for the first year. So that's like I said, it's exceeded my expectations. I was kind of thinking we'd be around 65,000. Learned a lot, still learning, but definitely I'm hooked on this. And my plan is to obviously get this maximized, get Camp Manatee maximized, and then start looking at other markets and have a portfolio of properties that myself and my family can visit and use, and also hopefully have other people pay off the bills. So pretty much in a nutshell.
Awesome. That's, a lot of good background and a lot of things to unpack there. So, it's interesting that you mentioned, COVID, right? Because I think a lot of us, we had a lot of time to just kind of sit inside, think about life, what we want to do. And that's kind of how, I started, posting content, because I had been investing before that, but I'm like, I'm having all these people from my family, my network, coworkers reach out to me wanting to kind of understand how to get starting in investing. And so I'm like, how can I kind of multiply myself? Because I'm taking all these calls, doing these lunches, and how do I kind of get the things that I learned? I'm not saying I'm like this guru expert by any means, but the conversations I've had with friends, it was really starting to help them. So I think a lot of introspection happened, and I think I've heard similar things. So I just thought that was interesting. But let's talk about your upbringing, right? Like, do you feel like you've always had this entrepreneurial mindset, instilled in you at a young age, or do you think that started developing as you started your own family and so forth?
Yeah, I've always kind of had sort of that spirit in me. I've had businesses when I was a little kid. I did window washing and stuff like that. And then I actually had a long-term rental that I recently sold. And so I've always been into real estate, always had an understanding of real estate, always had a knack for finding good properties, just seeing the value, seeing something that I know other people would like and would appreciate. So I think the combination of those two things really steered me in this direction. And of course, the asset, right? I mean, real estate is just such a great asset. I remember watching a video where, they drew a box on a whiteboard and they split that box up into 4 pieces. And they said, look, in this box, you're going to have appreciation. Your property's going to appreciate on average 6% per year. Obviously down here in South Florida, that's a lot more. And then you move over to the next box, and the next box is, you're going to have ultimately somebody else paying down your principal. And, that's awesome. And then you look at the box down the corner, and that's your tax savings. So, there's a whole host of things that you can do with your company and with your property to help offset your taxes. And, I'm a W-2 earner, so I pay taxes. And, one of the things that I've always seen is, they don't pay any taxes. They don't pay any taxes. Well, I do pay taxes. And actually, I actually create, opportunities for people in the economy, local economy. When you look at what we do in the Airbnb space, we're hiring cleaners, we're hiring management companies, we're hiring, all sorts of people to help manage that property locally. And then, of course, those people are going to visit that property and are using all those, local businesses. So, at the end of the day, I am paying a good fair share of taxes, and I'm generating an economy, a local economy. So that's definitely helped me sort of visualize that a little differently.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the last box is cash flow. And if you can get cash flow, obviously that's huge. You're going to be getting more revenue in the door, and you can use that for what you want. So when I look at that box and this was presented to me, I was like, there's no other investment that you can make that can get you all of this return. There's really not. And it's tangible. It's something you can use. It's something that you can pass on. So, I mean, it's really, broadened my horizons. And again, my goal is to have a multiple portfolio of properties, not just here in South Florida, but, I'm looking in North Carolina, I'm looking in Georgia, I'm looking on the West Coast. I think you guys are out in Utah. Certainly that region is pretty cool, and I have interest to visit there. So, I mean, and again, that could be my retirement plan, right? Once I leave my day job, I have all these properties out there that are passing income and revenue to me. So I don't have to worry about what the stock market's going to do, or I don't have to worry about losing my job. And that's given me a whole different sense of how I approach my real job, because now I'm not like, going there thinking, oh my God, what if I lose this job? So I'm taking more chances. I'm taking more risk. I'm doing things more in line of what I wouldn't do in the past, because I just feel like I have this other opportunity if things don't work out there. So, I mean, it's truly life-changing. It really is.
Yeah, no, a lot of good stuff there, Chad. So yeah, one of the things that you touched on with that buy box, right, with real estate, that's something that I really love about real estate. And obviously, I focus on the arbitrage method because there's a lot of people, they need cash flow immediately, right? And so like all those kind of secondary benefits, appreciation, those are all great. But I think a lot of people, want to, from the conversations I've had, they want to, quit their jobs as quickly as possible. So that's why, focus mainly on that. So I know, you mentioned, the buy box of the 4 different quadrants, awesome stuff. Obviously there's the inflation hedging as well that comes along with that, right? Because you're locked into this fixed rate debt for 30 years. Inflation's going to slowly eat away at your savings, right? But also eats away at your debt. So it's easier to pay back, as more dollars circulate. Don't want to get too nerdy about that, but obviously, that's another, great benefit. So I want to talk about, how did you get the confidence? Because, I think most people will start with the arbitrage method, but you went directly into buying. So what gave you that confidence to go straight into buying? Because obviously that should be the end goal with everyone in all these properties, because you could own them. You have all those other benefits that you mentioned. So what gave you that confidence to, go off with purchasing right rather than going the arbitrage method?
Yeah, I mean, it was scary. I'll be honest with you. I mean, basically what I did was I took equity out of my primary residence, which I'm sure a lot of people do. And, we visited an area that we really, really enjoyed. And I said, you know what, I'm going to take this leap. And it's funny because, I always wanted a golf cart. I'm like, I can't afford a golf cart. I can't do it. And I kept coming up with excuses as to why I couldn't do it. Well, guess what? I did it, and I have it, and I can, I'm able to pay for it and everything else and all the other concerns that I had. So, I mean, sometimes you just got to do it. And I kind of, that golf cart sits in my garage, and every time I go to work, I see it, and that's been my like inspiration, So I'm kind of, I think that's what people need to do. They need to visualize where they want to be, and honestly stop making excuses and do it. And you know what? What's the worst that could happen? You lose some money. Obviously, you don't want to take risks that are going to bankrupt you, right? You got to make, conservative, changes and things that are not going to destroy your lifestyle, obviously. So, and then there's ways to do that, obviously. For example, for the house that I bought, Camp Manatee, I put 25% down, which I know is a lot of money. But, the way I looked at it is, look, if this thing falls apart in a couple of years, I can always sell it, and I'll have a lot of equity, and then I'll walk away, on top of it. So, everybody's journey is going to be a little different. Everybody's risk tolerance is going to be a little different, but you just got to do it. And I think the arbitrage method is beautiful for people that are looking to dip their toe in the pool, so to speak. To look to get to taste it, to see it, and it's a sort of it's a very risk. It's a less risk, obviously, when you're not putting out $150,000 down payment. You're as you said, you do increments of 10,000 and then you rinse and repeat. And I mean, that's basically the same thing I'm going to do, but on a smaller scale. Or, so, my plan is once I have enough equity in this property, obviously once the mortgage rates and everything else start to hopefully go back to where they were, I'm going to rinse and repeat. I'm going to take money out of that property and roll it into a new one and keep doing it. And that's the plan. So, I mean, it's basically the same concept. It's just the arbitrage is a little, less risky from my perspective, because you're dealing with less money, less capital.
Yeah. No, for sure. That's definitely why, preach that. But obviously there's, nothing wrong with going the purchasing method. And that's kind of what I do myself now just because of, where I'm at in my career. But I'm sure, because you mentioned that having a long-term rental in the past, kind of want to dig into that a little bit as well. So I'm sure purchasing that gave you the confidence, like I've purchased properties before. And so, it's kind of, obviously different business model that we're going to do with the short-term rental. Let's talk about the long-term rental a little bit. What made you want to sell that property? What were some of like the challenges, some of the positives about owning that? Just because, I have a portfolio of, 40-ish rental units at this point. I have my thoughts on that, but I want to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I went to school up north. And I graduated from school and I didn't have a job, so I came down here with my parents. And there's this condo that came on the market and it was on the water and it was reasonably priced, so I bought it and I lived there for a couple of years. And then I met my wife, and obviously the condo wasn't big enough for a family, so we ended up using that property as a long-term rental. And then actually we took the equity out of that property to purchase a foreclosed property, which we went in and used that equity to fix that up. And then I use that property to move into the property I'm in now. So without getting in the door, I would have never been where I'm at now. And people talk about real estate all the time. They say the best time to own real estate is 10 years ago, right? And then the second best time is today. I can't say that enough, because people have this vision of they want to be in this certain house. Well, you can't get there today. So how are you going to get there? You buy something small and you use that eventually to bump yourself up. But going back to the condo, I will never buy a condo unit again just because I like control. And obviously when you're in a condo, you don't have a lot of control. There's an HOA, you have shared walls, you have shared roof, things that people do that you have no control over directly impact you. So ultimately it didn't really fit my portfolio, so to speak, and where I wanted to go. And again, there's a lot of wear and tear, right? You get somebody in there that's living in that place every day. They're doing things, they're making modifications. And honestly, the revenue that you get from an Airbnb is so much more significant. And you're getting somebody in there to clean that property multiple times a month. So the property is lasting longer and you don't have to renovate it as much. So, I miss the condo, and every once in a while I kind of kick myself to say, maybe I shouldn't have done it, but ultimately it was giving me more headaches than it was worth. And I use that money obviously to do what I'm doing now.
Yeah. No, that's the beauty of real estate, right? Because there's always going to be, even if there's like zero appreciation for like, let's say 10 years, which is, doesn't happen, but let's just assume that you always have the principal pay down, right? So you're still building equity from that sense. And, if you have a tenant, then they're paying it down for you. So there's always these different, levers that you can pull within real estate, which is why I love the business vehicle, right? Just because, you are protected and you're getting paid in 5 different ways simultaneously. And so even, in a scenario where like yours, where it might've been some headache, but you still came out ahead because, you purchased the property at the right time, so love that. So let's talk about your, Cat Manatee, awesome property, and you'll be live for a year. That's awesome. So how did you kind of gravitate towards that market and then ultimately choose the property that you have right now?
Yeah, I mean, so we went up there a couple of years ago, and it's in the North Florida area, so it's outside of Gainesville, so college town area. But in addition to that, it's on a river, and it's very, very close to a lot of the natural springs. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but there's springs down here in Florida that are crystal blue, and they stay 72 degrees year round. And believe it or not, other than beaches in Disney World, they're the third most attraction that people come to Florida for. So, I've got the university within 40 minutes. I've got these springs within 5 to 10, 15 minutes. I'm on a river. The property is 3+ acres, but it's adjacent to another 25 acres that will never be developed. And then right across the river is a preserve, a 6,000 acre preserve. So the wildlife that you see up there, deer, turkey, boar, I mean, it's just so different from South Florida. So it's funny because Floridians typically, when they go on vacation, they go to the Keys or they go to North Florida or Georgia or North Carolina, whereas everybody else goes to Disneyland and Disney World or whatever. And the beaches, we try to avoid those when everybody else is going there. So, and then as far as, the actual property, I mean, I think you've talked about this and preached this. It's really, the realtor is such a huge part of the equation. I mean, when you're looking at markets, if you link up with the right realtor, obviously they know the market, they know what's going to sell, they know what's going to be adding value. And my realtor was just phenomenal up there. I actually didn't get the property the first time. So it was actually on the market for literally hours. The previous folks that put the offer in, they put in a full price offer and it was off the market. That sale fell through, fortunately, but my realtor knew their realtor and he reached out to her and said, hey, listen, this fell through. It's going to be on the market again, very briefly. And I really lucked out with it, because I don't think if that relationship was there with those two realtors, I wouldn't have gotten it. And she really did have an eye for what the property, I mean, the property is just phenomenal. And I'm investing in it as I go along. But, the realtor also hooked me up with a cleaner up there, also with a handyman. So, I mean, especially when you're buying out of market where you don't live, that realtor is the linchpin, that they really are, because they have so many things that they could bring to the table on what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, no, 100%. Love everything that you just said there, especially if you're purchasing. It pays dividends to do the research up front, because not all realtors are created equal. Like, I've worked with so many in the past, and there's a lot of bad ones, but there's like a handful of good ones in every single market that you have to go after. And it's not just whoever sells the most real estate, right? It's the people that, in this case, right, someone that has experience in short-term rentals, that understands the vision of what you're looking for, and they just get after it. Without that relationship, you wouldn't have the property you have currently, you wouldn't have the team members in place. Like, there's so many different things that fall into it when you find a good realtor. I mean, that's, paramount. So love that you, made that. So with this property, I've seen it. It's awesome. So I know you said it's roughly around 90K gross. What does the cash flow look like? Everyone always likes to ask. So what are we looking at cash flow wise after all expenses?
Yeah, I'm on average around $2,500 a month, and again, that's me putting a good amount back in to just buy stuff and make upgrades to the property. But then you add in the tax savings and the other things. And I mean, if you look at the pro forma over 5 years, I mean, it's performing and will perform based on that so much better than anything else you could put your money into. Honestly, it really is. And the added benefit again from the ownership model is I've been up there 4 times already with my family, and so we're making great memories up there. And that's my whole plan is to buy properties where not only obviously I can make memories there, but I can share that with others that can go up and enjoy that as well. It's like a win-win, right? I mean, they can enjoy it and they pay me for it. And that helps me to reduce the cost and rinse and repeat, right? And then I can enhance the experience and get more people in. So it's really, I've really enjoyed the process, and it is a journey. It's not a destination, because every day is different, and it is stressful for anybody that goes into this. They need to understand that there is stress, especially when you first start out and you don't know if people are going to book, but it's literally it's kind of addicting though. Once you start getting the bookings and they start coming through, and you're always looking at your phone, and it's like you get this kind of like the social media rush, right? When somebody likes a post of yours, you get that same rush. So it's really cool. And again, there's really nothing else out there that can get you the benefits that you can get through a short-term rental, in my opinion.
No, 100%. I love what you said about, because everyone has different goals. Some people just want to make as much money as possible. The cool thing about short-term rentals is that you can choose where your properties are. And if you love to vacation there, like you said, create memories with your family, knowing that you're getting paid to go on that vacation, like there's no better feeling than that. Me and my family, we took a trip to one of our cabins, I think it was a couple of years ago at this point. We had our family there. Great, great vacation, great memories that we shared. And, in the back of my mind, I'm like, we're getting paid to like literally vacation here, which is awesome. And so that's definitely an added perk of, these short-term rentals. So let's kind of shift gears a little bit. So, from the next 6 to 12 months, from your, current portfolio, I know you're saying you're trying to continue to, add back and, improve your current property, but where do you want to be here in like the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to be, I think I have my next market pretty much lined up. So I'd like to be, actually visiting that market a little bit more. And I do have a realtor in that market that I like. So it's really probably, and again, a lot of things depend on what happens with rates and everything else. But my goal is to have, my second property within the next 2 to 3 years. And then, obviously accelerate that as I move on, maybe get more properties, every 2 to 3 years and just, basically get to something around the 5 to 10 properties. I don't want to be too much. And really the cool thing about this, Preston, I know you have a little boy, a little son, is, your family can learn how to run a business too. I mean, there's so many different assets of what we do, cash flow and real estate transactions and marketing, social media. I mean, it's really a tremendous way for kids to learn, your family to learn, and ultimately, hopefully take on the business, and those assets will be in your family forever. That's the really cool thing from my perspective, because, we know in school right now, they don't teach anything about finance, unfortunately, to kids. And there's so many lessons that you can learn. Basically learning how to run a business from the ground up, and you could be as hands-on or as hands-off as you want to be. And, kind of right now I'm in transition. I'm transitioning away from my current management company because I felt like I wasn't as hands-on as I needed to be. And honestly, I needed to learn more about how it all works. So I'm kind of taking a step back. I'm going to get a little bit more involved so I know exactly all the moving parts. Really when I first started, I just wanted to get it on the market, start getting that cash flow coming in. But now that I know that, the property's going to perform, I could kind of step back and really look at, the process and tweak it and really understand the nuts and bolts, so to speak.
And, the property managers, obviously there are some good ones out there too, but they do take a significant chunk of your income, right? So that's something I preach, hire your virtual assistants, train them, and you can literally do the same thing, if not better, than what the property management companies can do at a fraction of the cost. So we'll get you there. We'll get you there, Chad.
Yep. Crawl, walk, run, right?
All right. So, awesome conversation. This has been, great episode. So before, we hop off, thanks for the time again as well. What would you say to someone that's, considering wanting to start their own, entrepreneurship journey or just, short-term rental journey in general?
Yeah, I would say, invest in yourself, learn, make sure you do the homework and take the jump, take the leap, because you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised at what you can do. You'll be surprised at what you can accomplish, and you just got to do it sometimes.
Awesome, man. All right. Again, appreciate the time, Chad. Hope you have a great Friday, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot, Preston. Love what you're doing, man. And a quick plug for my property. Anybody that wants to book Camp Manatee, go to www.campmanatee.net, and we'll get you a nice discount for direct booking.
Awesome property. So we'll definitely send me the link, and we'll plug it on the channels here.
Awesome. Thanks, Preston. I appreciate it, man.